Sir, I saw your fiancé leaving mysterious charms under your bed, the maid's toddler whispered. The billionaire froze. Hey, listen. Before you scroll past this, I need you to hear something that still gives me chills. A 3-year-old girl, the maid's daughter, walked up to a billionaire in the middle of his own kitchen, tugged on his sleeve, and whispered 8 words that would unravel everything he thought he knew about the woman he was about to marry. Sir, I saw your fiancé leaving mysterious charms under your bed. He laughed it off. Toddlers say strange things, right? But that night he couldn't sleep. Something in the way she said it, so serious, so scared, stayed with him. So he waited until the house went quiet, got down on his knees, and reached under his own bed. What he found there wasn't what he expected. It wasn't a curse. It wasn't betrayal. It was something far more heartbreaking, and far more dangerous than he could have ever imagined. Stay with me till the end. You will not see this coming. Hey everyone, welcome back. Before we dive into today's story, drop a comment and let me know. Where are you watching this from? I love seeing how far these stories travel. And hey, if you're new here, consider subscribing. We tell stories like this every single week, the kind that stay with you long after the video ends. Let's get into it. The first time Adrian Cole heard the little girl's voice, he almost didn't register the words at all. It was a Tuesday evening, the kind of quiet that only exists in houses too large for the number of people living in them. Adrian's estate sat on 11 acres outside the city, all glass and stone and silence, the kind of silence that money buys but never truly owns. He was 34 years old, and by every measure that mattered to the outside world, he had everything. A shipping and logistics empire that spanned 4 continents. A name that opened doors before he even knocked. A face that had been on the cover of 3 business magazines that year alone. And in 6 weeks, he was going to marry Elena Vasquez. Elena was 30, warm-eyed, quick to laugh, the kind of woman who remembered the names of every waiter, every driver, every assistant who crossed her path. She had come into Adrian's life 18 months ago at a charity gala, wearing a green dress that didn't match anything else in the room, and she'd told him, with a straight face, that his tie was crooked and his smile was fake. He'd fixed the tie. He was still working on the smile. But with her it never felt fake at all. His mother had died when he was 19. His father had followed 4 years later, leaving Adrian the empire and precious little else. No siblings, no cousins close enough to call family, just boardrooms full of people who smiled at him because of what he could do for them. Elena was the first person in a decade who looked at him like he was a person and not a portfolio. So when little Mia, the 3-year-old daughter of Rosa, the housekeeper who had worked for Adrian's family since before he was born, tugged on his sleeve that evening while he stood in the kitchen pouring coffee, he almost didn't stop to listen. "Mr. Adrian," she said, her voice small and careful, the way children speak when they've been told 100 times not to interrupt grown-ups. "Hey there, Mia Bug." He crouched down to her level, the way he always did with her. She had wide brown eyes and a gap where her front tooth used to be. And she was, without question, the only person on the property who wasn't the least bit intimidated by him. "Sir," she whispered, and something about the way she said sir instead of Mr. Adrian made the hair on his arms rise. "I saw your fiancé leaving mysterious charms under your bed." He blinked. "What did you say, sweetheart?" Mia glanced over her shoulder toward the hallway, as if checking that no one else could hear. "Miss Elena. She goes in your room when you're not home. She puts little things under the bed. Little cloth things. With string. Saw her. 2 times. Adrian felt something cold slide down his spine, though he told himself immediately that it was nothing. Children invented things. Children misunderstood things. Mia probably saw Elena tidying or looking for something she'd dropped, and her small mind had turned it into a story, the way children's minds do. "Did you tell your mom about this?" he asked gently. Mia shook her head hard, her dark curls bouncing. "Mommy said don't talk about the house. Don't talk about the family. But I got scared. Charms are for witches, Mr. Adrian. My abuela said so. Witches put charms to make bad things happen to people. He almost laughed. Almost. But there was something in the girl's face. Not mischief, not a child seeking attention, but real, unmistakable fear that made the laugh die in his throat. "Thank you for telling me," he said instead, keeping his voice light, easy, the voice he used when he needed a room full of investors to stay calm during a crisis. "I'm sure it's nothing. But you did the right thing telling me." Mia nodded solemnly and scurried off toward the kitchen, where her mother was finishing the dinner dishes, and Adrian stood alone in the hallway with his coffee going cold in his hand. He told himself he wouldn't think about it. He thought about nothing else for the rest of the night. Elena was out at a friend's baby shower that evening, wouldn't be back until late, and Adrian found himself, for the first time since they'd gotten engaged, watching the clock and waiting for her, not with the warm anticipation of a man in love, but with the low, simmering unease of a man who suspects he's missed something important. He tried to distract himself. He answered emails. He reviewed a quarterly report from his Singapore office. He poured a whiskey he didn't finish. And every few minutes, his eyes drifted toward the staircase that led to his bedroom, where, if Mia was telling the truth, something was hidden beneath the bed he shared or would soon share with the woman he loved. By 11, curiosity had curdled into something closer to dread. By midnight, he found himself standing at the foot of his own bed, staring down at the neatly made comforter, his heart pounding in a way it hadn't pounded in a boardroom in years. He knelt down. He lifted the edge of the bed skirt, and beneath his bed, tucked carefully against the far corner where the shadows were deepest, he saw them. Small cloth pouches, no bigger than his palm, tied with red string. 6 of them, arranged in a pattern he didn't recognize, each one giving off the faint, unmistakable scent of dried herbs. His hands were shaking as he reached for the nearest one. Adrian sat on the floor of his own bedroom at nearly 1 in the morning, 6 small cloth pouches spread out on the hardwood in front of him like evidence at a crime scene, and for the first time in longer than he could remember, he felt genuinely, completely afraid. He untied the string on the first pouch with careful fingers. Inside, he found a mixture of dried herbs he didn't recognize, something that smelled faintly of rosemary and something sharper, almost bitter, underneath it. A small folded piece of paper. A tiny sliver of what looked like bark. And strangest of all, a small brass button that Adrian recognized immediately, because it was identical to the buttons on the coat his father had been buried in. His stomach dropped. How could Elena have gotten something like that? The coat had been his father's favorite, a charcoal wool overcoat he'd worn to every important meeting of his career, and it had gone into the ground with him 9 years ago. Adrian himself had chosen it. He had stood at the casket and fixed the collar himself. He unfolded the small piece of paper with trembling hands, expecting. He didn't know what. Hex. A curse written in a language he wouldn't understand. Some symbol that would confirm every horrible thought now racing through his mind. Instead he found handwriting. Elena's handwriting, unmistakable. The same looping E she used to sign her name on his birthday card 3 months ago. For Adrian's father, wherever he is. Watch over your son. He is more alone than he lets anyone see. Adrian sat frozen, the paper trembling in his fingers. He opened the second pouch. More herbs. Another folded note. For Adrian's mother. He still keeps your photograph in his desk drawer. The one from the lake house. He doesn't know I've seen it. Please, if you can hear anything from wherever you are, help him sleep at night. He doesn't sleep enough. Third pouch. His hands were no longer trembling from fear now, but from something else entirely, something he didn't have a name for yet. For whoever is watching over this house. Protect Adrian from the people who smile at him and want something from him. Protect him from feeling like he has to earn love. He already has mine, freely, no conditions. By the fourth pouch, Adrian's vision had blurred and he realized distantly that he was crying. Really crying, the kind of crying he hadn't allowed himself since his father's funeral, when he'd stood at the podium and delivered a eulogy without a single crack in his voice because that was what Coles did, that was what the family name required. The fifth note read, "For the little girl Mia. Let her grow up safe. Let her never have to whisper secrets out of fear." And the sixth, the last one, tucked slightly apart from the others, as if it had been placed there more recently, simply said, "For me. Let me be brave enough to tell him the truth before the wedding. He deserves to know everything. Even the part I'm most afraid of." Adrian sat on the floor of his bedroom until nearly 3 in the morning, the 6 small pouches arranged in front of him. His father's brass button catching the moonlight from the window, and he understood, with a clarity that ached in his chest, that he had spent an entire evening suspecting the kindest, most quietly devoted person in his life of something monstrous, when in reality, she had been carrying a private ritual of love and folk tradition from her grandmother's village, offering up prayers disguised as charms for a man who didn't even know he needed protecting. But that last note stayed with him. Let me be brave enough to tell him the truth before the wedding. Even the part I'm most afraid of. What truth? What was she afraid of? He didn't sleep at all that night. And when Elena came home the following afternoon, tired, sun-kissed from the baby shower, carrying a slice of cake wrapped in a napkin. "For you, because I know you didn't eat all day." Adrian looked at her across the kitchen island and realized he had 2 choices. He could pretend he'd never found the pouches. He could let her keep her secret, whatever it was, and go on pretending everything was simple. Or he could ask her the question that had been building in his chest since 3 in the morning, the one that terrified him more than any hostile takeover or market crash ever had. "What are you so afraid to tell me?" He chose the second one. And nothing would ever be simple again. "Elena," Adrian said, his voice steadier than he felt, "I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me." She set the slice of cake down on the counter, and something in her face shifted immediately. The easy warmth replaced, just for a second, by a flicker of alarm so quick that if Adrian hadn't been watching for it, he would have missed it entirely. "Okay," she said carefully. "What's wrong?" He almost lost his nerve. He almost said nothing, "Forget it, I love you, let's just eat cake." But the image of those 6 small pouches, tied with careful red string, kept surfacing in his mind, along with the last note, "Even the part I'm most afraid of," and he made himself continue. "I found the charms under our bed." The color drained from Elena's face so fast that Adrian instinctively reached out to steady her, thinking she might actually faint. She gripped the edge of the counter instead, her knuckles white. "You went through them," she whispered. It wasn't an accusation. It sounded, if anything, like relief mixed with dread, the particular exhaustion of someone who has been carrying a secret so long that even having it discovered feels, in some strange way, like being allowed to put down a heavy bag. "Mia saw you," Adrian said gently. "She was scared. She thought you might be a witch, putting curses on me." A choked, wet laugh escaped Elena, followed almost immediately by tears. "A witch," she repeated. "God. If only it were that simple." "Talk to me," Adrian said. "Please. Whatever it is." Elena sank onto one of the kitchen stools, and for a long moment she said nothing at all, staring at her hands as if the words she needed were hidden somewhere in her palms. "My grandmother," she finally began, "raised me in a small town outside Oaxaca until I was 7. She believed in things most people would call superstition, protective charms, blessings tied in cloth, prayers for the dead disguised as folk magic. When she died, I promised her I would carry the tradition forward, even after we moved here, even after everyone around me stopped believing in anything they couldn't put in a spreadsheet." Her mouth twisted into something that was almost a smile. "I started making them for you the week after we got engaged. For your parents. For this house. For you mostly because you carry so much and you never let anyone see how much it costs you." Adrian felt his chest tighten. That's not a secret you needed to be afraid of telling me, Elena. That's beautiful. Why would you hide that from me? Elena's eyes lifted to his, and in them, Adrian saw something he had never seen before in 18 months of knowing her. Real, unguarded terror. Because the charms aren't the secret, Adrian, she said quietly. The charms are the smallest part of it. The room went very still. 6 months before we met, Elena continued, her voice dropping almost to a whisper, I worked for a private security consulting firm. Not as an agent, as an analyst. We did background and threat assessments for high-net-worth families. Corporate espionage risk. Personal safety risk. She swallowed hard. One of the files that crossed my desk was yours. Adrian went very still. What are you talking about? There was a threat assessment flagged on your company 18 months before I ever walked into that gala in the green dress, Elena said. Someone inside your own board had been quietly meeting with a rival conglomerate. Someone had been asking very specific questions about your personal schedule, your security detail, your travel patterns. The kind of questions people ask when they're not planning a business deal. They're planning something else. Who? Adrian's voice had gone flat, cold, the voice of a man doing rapid silent math. I don't know for certain, Elena said. The file was pulled before I could finish the assessment. Someone above me shut it down, said it was a false flag, nothing to worry about. But I never stopped worrying. And then, 3 weeks later I was at that gala, not by accident, Adrian. I asked a mutual friend to introduce us. I told myself it was just to keep an eye on things until I was sure you were safe. Adrian felt the floor tilt slightly beneath him. You mean we didn't meet by chance? You were investigating a threat against me, and that's how it started, Elena said, tears sliding freely down her face now. But Adrian, I swear to you, on my grandmother's grave, everything after that first week was real. I fell in love with you because of who you actually are, not because of some file on a desk. But I never told you the reason I walked up to you that night, because I was terrified that the moment you knew, you'd only ever see me as someone who got close to you for a reason that had nothing to do with you. The kitchen was silent except for the low hum of the refrigerator and the sound of Adrian's own heartbeat pounding in his ears. Elena, he said slowly, if there was a real threat against me 18 months ago, a credible one, serious enough for a security firm to build a file, where is that threat now? Elena wiped her face with the back of her hand, and when she looked up at him, the fear in her eyes had shifted into something harder, more resolved. That's the part one haven't told you yet, she said. Because 3 days ago, I found out the file wasn't closed at all. It was buried. And the person who buried it is someone you trust completely. Who? Adrian's voice came out rougher than he intended. Elena hesitated, and in that hesitation, Adrian felt something shift permanently between them. The last thin membrane of a simple, easy engagement dissolving into something far more complicated, far more dangerous. Marcus, she said finally. Adrian actually laughed. A short, disbelieving bark of a sound. Marcus. My CFO. The man who's been with this company since before I could legally drink. Elena, he was my father's protégé. He walked me through my father's funeral arrangements. He's practically family. I know. Elena's voice was gentle but unyielding. That's exactly why no one questioned him pulling the file. That's exactly why it worked. Worked for what, Elena? Say it plainly. Stop protecting me from the truth and just say it. Elena took a breath that seemed to cost her something physical. 3 days ago, I got a message from a former colleague at the firm. Someone who still had access to old records. 18 months ago, Marcus met 4 times with representatives from Holbrook Industries. Your father spent the last decade of his life fighting off a hostile acquisition attempt from Holbrook. Everyone assumed that fight ended when your father passed and you took full control. It didn't end, Adrian. Just went quiet. And Marcus has spent the last 1.5 years positioning himself as the one person best placed to finish what your father stopped, by making sure something happens to you before the merger vote next month. Adrian's ears were ringing. The vote next month. The one Marcus has been pushing me to finalize early. He said it would strengthen investor confidence before the wedding. Because if that vote passes with the current board composition, and something happens to you afterward, Elena said quietly, control of the company doesn't default to a Cole family trust. It defaults to a shared executive committee. One that Marcus has spent 18 months quietly stacking with people loyal to him. The room tilted again, and this time Adrian actually reached for the counter to steady himself. You're telling me, he said slowly, that the man who taught me how to read a balance sheet when I was 12 years old, who sat beside me at my own father's grave, has been planning to have me killed. I'm telling you what the evidence suggests, Elena said carefully. I don't have proof of intent to kill you. I have proof of financial motive, of buried threat assessments, of secret meetings with a company that has wanted control of coal industries for 15 years. I have enough to be terrified, Adrian. Not yet enough to go to the police. Adrian was quiet for a long moment, his mind running through 18 months of memories at impossible speed. Every meeting, every dinner, every moment Marcus had put a steady hand on his shoulder and told him his father would be proud. He thought of the last board meeting when Marcus had pushed hard, almost aggressively, for Adrian to sign off on new personal security protocols. Protocols that Adrian now realized with a cold, sick feeling would have routed all of his security detail through a private firm Marcus personally vetted. The charms, Adrian said suddenly, looking up at Elena. You didn't just make them out of grief for my parents. You made them because you were terrified something was actually going to happen to me. And you didn't know how else to protect me, because you couldn't prove anything yet. Elena nodded, tears falling freely now. I know it sounds insane. A grown woman with a business degree, hiding cloth pouches under her fiancé's bed like some kind of medieval talisman. But Adrian, when I couldn't do anything else, when I had no proof, no allies, no way to warn you without sounding paranoid, I did the only thing my grandmother ever taught me that felt like it might actually work. I prayed over you, every single night. Because I love you, and because I was terrified I was going to lose you before I ever got the chance to marry you. Adrian crossed the kitchen in 3 steps and pulled her into his arms, and for a long moment, neither of them said anything at all, just held on in the quiet, sunlit kitchen of a house that suddenly felt far less safe than either of them had believed it to be that morning. We need proof, Adrian finally said against her hair. Real proof. Something we can take to the board, to the authorities, before that vote next month. Elena pulled back to look at him, and there was something steely in her expression now. The analyst returning, pushing past the frightened woman who had spent a year hiding pouches under a bed. There might be a way, she said slowly. But it means one of us has to get close enough to Marcus to find it. And it has to be someone he'd never suspect. The plan they built over the following 2 weeks was, by Adrian's own admission, the most frightening thing he had ever done. More frightening than any hostile takeover, any 9-figure negotiation, any moment in his professional life. Because this time, the stakes weren't measured in dollars. They were measured in whether he would live to see his own wedding. Elena's old colleague at the security firm, a woman named Priya who had left the company a year earlier over ethical concerns about exactly this kind of buried file, agreed to help quietly, on the condition that her name never surfaced publicly. Together, she and Elena built a narrow, careful strategy. They would not confront Marcus. They would not alert the board. Instead, they would give Marcus exactly what he wanted, the impression that the merger vote was proceeding smoothly, that Adrian suspected nothing, while quietly tracing the financial trail between Marcus and Holbrook Industries. Adrian's role was the hardest part. He had to look Marcus in the eye every day, thank him for his years of loyalty, ask his advice on the merger timeline, and betray nothing. You're good at hiding things, Elena told him one night, only half joking, as they lay awake staring at the ceiling. I suppose that's how you've survived running a company since you were 23. I learned from the best, Adrian said quietly. My father never let anyone see him sweat. I used to think that was strength. Now I wonder how lonely it must have been. It took 11 days for Priya to find what they needed. A wire transfer, routed through 3 shell companies, from a Holbrook subsidiary directly into a private account linked to Marcus's brother-in-law, dated 4 days after the last board meeting where Marcus had pushed hardest for the new security protocols. The amount was substantial enough that no reasonable explanation existed except the one they already suspected. But it was the second document Priya found that made Adrian's blood run cold. An email, recovered from a server Marcus had believed permanently wiped, outlining a contingency timeline, tied explicitly to the merger vote and to Adrian's upcoming honeymoon, when his security detail would be reduced for privacy during an extended trip to a remote coastal property in Portugal that only a handful of people knew about. Only a handful of people, including Marcus, who had personally recommended the property. Adrian sat with that email for a long time before he could bring himself to show it to Elena. He was going to do it on our honeymoon, Adrian said, his voice hollow. In the one place I was supposed to feel the safest in my entire life. Elena took his hand, and for once, she didn't try to soften it. Then we make sure he never gets the chance. They took everything to the board's independent counsel 3 days later. Not the full board, not yet, but a single trusted attorney who had served the Cole family for over 20 years and had no connection whatsoever to Marcus. The attorney's face, Adrian would later say, went the color of old paper as he read through the documents Priya had recovered. Within 48 hours, a quiet, carefully coordinated intervention was underway. Federal investigators brought in under the cover of a routine financial compliance review, so as not to alert Marcus that anything had changed. Adrian continued going into the office. Continued smiling. Continued thanking Marcus for his guidance on the merger vote. His hand steady even as his heart hammered every single time Marcus put a friendly hand on his shoulder. The vote was postponed under the guise of additional regulatory review. A delay that bought the investigators the time they needed. Marcus was arrested on a Thursday morning, quietly, in the underground parking garage of Cole Industries headquarters, before he ever reached his office. Adrian was not there to see it. He had asked not to be. Some things, he told Elena, he simply couldn't watch, no matter how much the man deserved it. That evening, Adrian sat once again on the floor of his bedroom, in the same spot where he had first discovered 6 small cloth pouches tied with red string, and Elena sat beside him, her head on his shoulder, both of them utterly exhausted in the particular way that only follows the release of a fear you've been carrying so long you forgot what it felt like to be without it. I owe you my life, Adrian said quietly. Not metaphorically, Elena. Literally. If Mia hadn't said something. If you hadn't kept making those charms, kept your promise to your grandmother, kept watching me even when you were terrified to tell me the truth. You don't owe me anything, Elena said. I did what anyone who loved you would do. That's exactly why I owe you everything, Adrian said. Because you didn't have to love me at all. You could have closed that file 18 months ago and walked away, and none of this would have touched your life. Elena was quiet for a long moment. Then she said softly, "There's one more thing I never told you." Adrian turned to look at her, his stomach tightening instinctively, some part of him bracing for one more devastating revelation. "What is it?" "The reason I really left the security firm 3 days before I found the buried file," Elena said. "It wasn't a coincidence, Adrian. I'd already quit 2 weeks earlier. Because I'd decided after everything that I didn't want to protect you as an analyst anymore. I wanted to protect you as someone who loved you. I just needed one more piece of proof to be sure I was walking away from that job for the right reasons, and not just walking toward you." The wedding took place 6 weeks later than originally planned. Not in Portugal, not at the remote coastal property that would forever now carry the shadow of what almost happened there, but in the garden of Adrian's estate, under a canopy of white flowers that Rosa, the housekeeper, had helped Elena choose herself. Mia, freshly turned 4, was the flower girl, and she took her job with the kind of solemn seriousness only a small child can bring to a ceremonial task, scattering rose petals down the aisle with the same careful attention she had once given to whispering a warning that changed the course of Adrian's entire life. Before the ceremony began, Adrian knelt down in front of her, straightening the small crown of flowers in her dark curls. "Mia," he said softly, "do you remember what you told me that day in the kitchen?" Mia nodded solemnly. "About the charms. That was the bravest thing anyone has ever done for me," Adrian said. "You saved my life, Mia Bug. Do you understand that? A 4-year-old girl saved a grown man's life because she was brave enough to say something scary out loud." Mia considered this with great seriousness. "Miss Elena isn't a witch," she said finally, as if this were the most important conclusion to draw from the whole ordeal. Adrian laughed. A real laugh, warm and unguarded, the kind he hadn't allowed himself in years before Elena walked into his life. "No, sweetheart. She's not a witch. She's just someone who loves very, very hard, and isn't afraid to fight for the people she loves. That's a kind of magic all its own." Marcus's trial would take place over the following year, the evidence Elena and Priya had uncovered forming the backbone of a case that would eventually implicate 2 senior executives at Holbrook Industries alongside him. Adrian testified once, briefly, his voice steady in a way that would have made his father proud, though for entirely different reasons than his father might have imagined. Not because he hid his fear, but because he had finally learned, from the woman standing beside him, that surviving something didn't require pretending it hadn't hurt. Elena never stopped making the small cloth pouches. Years later, long after the trial had faded into a footnote in coal industry's history, long after Marcus's name had been quietly scrubbed from the company's records, Adrian would still occasionally find a new one tucked in a drawer, or slipped into his travel bag before a business trip, or hidden in the nursery when their first daughter was born, each one carrying the same quiet devotion as the very first 6, the ones a frightened toddler had discovered and been brave enough to name out loud. He never told Elena, but he kept that first pouch, the one with his father's brass button, in his desk drawer for the rest of his life, right beside the photograph from the lake house that she had somehow always known was there. Because in the end, the mysterious charms under the bed were never a curse, and they were never a secret meant to harm him. They were a woman's silent, desperate, unshakable love, made visible in the only language her grandmother had ever taught her, and they had saved his life long before he ever understood he needed saving at all. The lesson in this story is simple, but it's one we all need reminding of. Sometimes the people who love us most aren't the loudest about it. Sometimes love looks like quiet vigilance, like small sacrifices made in the dark, like a person willing to carry a secret alone rather than risk being misunderstood. And sometimes the smallest, most powerless-seeming person in the room, a child, an assistant, someone we overlook, is the one brave enough to say the thing that saves us. If this story moved you, hit that like button and let me know in the comments. Where are you watching from tonight? Don't forget to subscribe because we bring you a brand new heart-touching story just like this one every single week. And if you love this one, go watch more of our stories right now. I promise they'll stay with you too.